Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the foggy, cobblestone streets of Victorian London, where the air smells of salt, coal smoke, and something faintly exotic, maybe cinnamon, maybe cloves. It's just before dawn, and you're standing at the docks, watching burly men unload crates stamped with strange, faraway names. Calcutta, Zanzibar, Jamaica. The wooden planks creak underfoot, and seagulls scream overhead like they're arguing over the best trade routes. Now, you might think grocery shopping in the 1800s was simple, just stroll in, grab a loaf of bread, and leave. But oh no, you probably wouldn't last 5 minutes as a Victorian grocer's apprentice. One wrong entry in the ledger, one misplaced crate of tea, and suddenly you're bankrupt, or worse, infamous in the local paper as the fool who mistook ginger for turmeric. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment below, where are you listening from, and what's the time? I always love imagining you all drifting off in different corners of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first light of morning is barely touching the Thames as the ship's crews heave sacks of coffee beans onto the quay. Each bag is stamped with the merchant's mark, some fancy family crest. Maybe a lion holding a pineapple, because why not? You watch as a clerk in a slightly too tight waistcoat pokes one with a brass-tipped cane, listening for the telltale rustle of quality beans. Historians still argue whether this was an actual science or just a way to look important. Nearby, a crate cracks open, spilling a few stray peppercorns across the damp wood. A teenage dockhand scrambles to scoop them up, not out of diligence, but because pepper was worth its weight in silver, and even a handful could buy him a decent meal. Meanwhile, a customs officer yawns into his ledger, squinting at the illegible handwriting of some sleep-deprived captain. And then there's the smell. Oh, the smell. The docks are a symphony of odors. The earthy punch of unroasted coffee, the sharp tang of citrus from a crate of Sicilian lemons, and beneath it all, the ever-present reek of the Thames, a mix of sewage, dead fish, and the ghosts of long-spoiled cargo. But the grocers don't mind. They're already haggling in hushed tones, their breath visible in the chilly air. One man slips another a silver coin, and suddenly, a sack of ordinary cinnamon becomes premium cinnamon. It's the oldest trick in the book well, after watering down the whiskey. The grocer's almanac sits open on the counter, its pages yellowed and stained with decades of tea spills, ink blots, and what you hope is just jam. This isn't some neat little pocket planner. It's a beast of a ledger, thick enough to stop a bullet, filled with cramped handwriting that loops and dives like a drunk sparrow. You run your finger down the entries for October 1863. Received, 12 casks Malaga raisins, 2 slightly damp. Sold, 3 pounds nutmeg to Mrs. Pembroke. Suspect she's reselling. Note, Mr. Fletcher's credit extended again. God help us. Keeping these records straight was a full-time job in itself. No barcodes, no spreadsheets, just ink, paper, and a prayer that the apprentice wouldn't confuse pepper with paprika again. That incident of 1857 was still whispered about in grocer circles. The real magic lies in the harvest charts scribbled in the margins. When the Spanish oranges would arrive, how the Indian monsoons might delay the tea shipments, which winters were bad enough to freeze the butter solid during transport. Some shopkeepers even tracked lunar cycles, convinced it affected how quickly flour went stale. Historians still argue whether this was folk wisdom or just Victorian astrology for people who really cared about biscuit texture. And then there's the debt pages. Page after page of IOUs from local families, the baker's wife who needed sugar for preserves, the schoolmaster who always paid late but with perfect penmanship. These weren't just sales records. They were the pulse of the neighborhood. You flip to a random page and find a pressed flour tucked between the entries for salt cod and starch. Maybe a sweetheart's gift to a lonely clerk. Or maybe someone just really wanted to remember what lavender looked like in January. The spice shelves loom before you like a fragrant fortress towering mahogany cabinets with dozens of tiny drawers, each labeled in elegant cursive that probably took some poor apprentice 6 months to perfect. Cinnamon, cloves, mace, ingredients that had sparked wars, toppled empires, and now were being meticulously arranged by a grocer named Herbert with a slight limp and strong opinions about nutmeg. You watch as Herbert takes a brass key from his waistcoat and unlocks a special drawer marked East India Co-Reserve. Inside, a single jar of saffron, the threads glowing like captured sunset. He handles it like it might evaporate if he breathes wrong. 1 pinch, he mutters to himself, equals 3 days' wages for the dockhands unloading the shipment. The placement of each spice is a silent power play. Pepper sits at eye level, not because it's commonly used, but because its jet black grains look impressive to wealthy customers. Meanwhile, the cheaper but more practical ginger gets relegated to the bottom shelf, where only cooks and servants would bother to look. Historians still argue whether this was clever marketing or just Victorian classism in spice form. A bell jingles as the door opens. A woman in a rustling silk dress sweeps in, sniffing the air like a bloodhound. "Mr. Whitcomb," she declares, "your cinnamon is inferior this week." Herbert doesn't even blink. He's heard this every Tuesday since 1852. With the patience of a saint and the poker face of a card sharp, he produces a different jar from beneath the counter. "Ah, but madam, have you tried our special reserve cinnamon?" It's the same cinnamon. The tea caddy is locked. Of course it's locked. In a shop filled with sugar worth more than silver and spices that could ransom a king, tea is the most closely guarded treasure of all. You watch as the head clerk, a Mr. Phelps with eyebrows like overgrown, hedgerows produces no fewer than 3 keys from various pockets before the polished oak box finally clicks open. Inside, the leaves are kept in individual tins lined with lead foil, each stamped with elaborate Chinese characters that none of the English grocers can actually read. A visiting scholar once translated them as mostly poetic descriptions like dragon's breath dawn picking, which historians still argue might have been invented on the spot to impress customers. Measuring out an ounce requires ritual precision. A brass scale is produced, its pans polished to a mirror shine. The clerk wears white cotton gloves, not for hygiene, but because tea leaves were notorious for absorbing odors, and the lingering scent of yesterday's kippers could ruin a perfectly good batch of Darjeeling. You notice how he always adds 1 extra pinch for the pot, a tradition that probably started as generosity, but became mandatory after the Great Tea Shortage of 1842 nearly caused a riot at a duchess's garden party. A boy in an apron too big for him hovers nearby, waiting to sweep up any fallen leaves. These precious crumbs would later be mixed with inferior stock and sold at discount to servants, a practice everyone knew about but politely ignored, like bad teeth or questionable inheritances. The sugar arrives in conical loaves wrapped in blue paper, each one looking like a miniature Matterhorn carved from crystallized sunlight. You watch as the grocer's apprentice, a freckled boy who still jumps at the sound of the doorbell, carefully chips away at one with specialized tongs, sending glittering shards cascading onto the weighing paper. This isn't just sugar, this is sculpture material. Wealthy households would display entire sugar centerpieces at dinner parties, intricate replicas of Greek temples or sailing ships that guests were meant to admire but never actually eat. Historians still argue whether this was art or the most delicious form of conspicuous consumption. The most famous confectioner in Mayfair reportedly kept a sugar model of Windsor Castle in his shop window for 6 months until a particularly damp summer turned it into a sticky moat. But the real scandal? The sugar nips. These ornate silver tools, part scissors, part pliers, were designed for breaking off pieces of loaf sugar. Wealthy ladies would bring their own personalized nips to tea shops, the handles monogrammed and jeweled, making the simple act of sweetening one's tea into a performative display of status. In 1857, the Times actually published a heated debate about whether pearl-encrusted nips were vulgar or progressive. Meanwhile, the apprentice sneezes, sending a spray of sugar dust across the counter. The head grocer sighs. This is why they can't have nice things. The pickle jars line the back wall like a museum of the bizarre glass prisons for fruits, vegetables and creatures suspended in briny amber. Your eyes drift past the standard cucumbers and onions to the real conversation pieces. A jar of tiny pears floating like botanical specimens, another with what appears to be an entire quail submerged in vinegar, a delicacy from Normandy. And wait, is that a small octopus? The grocer notices your horrified fascination. Ah, our Humboldt's Wonders collection, he says proudly, tapping a jar containing what looks like preserved hummingbirds. Imported direct from Paris. The French will pickle anything that doesn't pickle them first. He explains how these grotesque delicacies were more decoration than food, meant to impress guests at wealthy dinner parties. Historians still argue whether anyone actually ate the pickled peacock eggs, or if they just got passed around the table until someone discreetly buried them in a potted plant. A well-dressed matron examines a jar of Mermaid's Kiss cocktail onions with suspicion. These appear to be glowing, Mr. Whitcomb. The grocer doesn't miss a beat. Copper sulfate for color retention, madam. Perfectly safe in small quantities. The way he says small quantities suggests the definition might be flexible. In the corner, the apprentice nearly drops a jar of pickled walnuts, catching it just in time. The grocer doesn't even look up. He's heard that particular gasp and stumble combination too many times to be alarmed anymore. The coffee grinder whirs like an asthmatic dragon, its cast iron mechanism trembling as it pulverizes beans into something resembling black gold, or at least mostly beans. You catch the grocer discreetly adding a handful of burnt toast crumbs to the mix, practice so common it had its own nickname, Parliament coffee, after the allegedly adulterated brew served in the Houses of Parliament. A mustachioed gentleman in a slightly outdated frock coat sniffs the air suspiciously. This smells ... Fred Jenkins. The grocer doesn't even pause in his grinding. Special reserve blend, sir, with just a whisper of ... Sumatran volcanic soil minerals for body. The customer nods sagely, completely fooled by what was essentially fireplace scrapings mixed with yesterday's bread. The real artistry comes in the blending. A scoop of real mocha beans here, a pinch of chicory root there. Each grocer had his own signature mix. There was approximately 1 part coffee to 3 parts creative storytelling. Historians still argue whether these additives were fraud or early flavor signs. After all, chicory does make a decent caffeine-free brew. Behind the counter, the apprentice practices his sales pitch. This particular roast was personally selected by, Turkish coffee monks? The grocer facepalms so hard his sideburns tremble. The snuff counter is a minefield of tiny crimes. You watch as a dandy in an emerald green waistcoat casually palms a pinch of high toast while pretending to examine a jar of throat lozenges. The grocer sees it happen. Of course he does, but merely clears his throat loudly. The thief has the decency to look sheepish as he sneezes into his lace handkerchief, creating a perfect mushroom cloud of stolen snuff. This is the eternal dance of Victorian tobacco shopping. The fancy brass snuff boxes are all chained to the counter like library books, but customers still find ways to pilfer the goods. The most brazen offenders? Elderly ladies who'd hide pinches in their glove compartments, then pretend to faint if confronted. Historians still argue whether this was actual kleptomania or just bored aristocrats playing shoplifting games. A new shipment arrives in colorful tins, labeled with health claims that would make a modern doctor weep. Dr. Thorndyke's Lung Invigorator. 99% tobacco, 1% questionable herbs. sailor's strength snuff, with actual ground seashells for maritime vigor. The grocer rolls his eyes as he stocks them. He knows these are the same cheap leaves rebranded for different suckers. In the corner, the apprentice accidentally inhales while dusting the snuff shelves and goes into a sneezing fit so violent it knocks over a display of medicinal cigars. Somewhere, an insurance policy trembles. The butter crock might look innocent, just a simple stoneware dish with a wooden lid, but it's hiding a scandal. You watch as the grocer plunges a special testing rod into the pale yellow mound, withdrawing it to examine the color. He mutters. Only 2 parts beef fat to 1 part milk this time. Progress. This is the aftermath of the Great Butter Rebellion of 1856, when newspapers exposed how most London butter contained more suet than cream. The ensuing uproar led to grocers displaying their butter with testing rods prominently visible, though whether this actually improved quality or just made the fraud more artistic remains debatable. Historians still argue if the butter purity leagues were consumer advocates or just dairy lobbyists in moralistic clothing. A housekeeper in a starched apron sniffs a sample suspiciously. This doesn't smell like last week's batch. The grocer doesn't blink. Different cows, madam. These ones grazed exclusively on ... Kentish lavender fields. The truth? The dairy farmer's wife had started adding a drop of rosewater to mask the suet. Meanwhile, the apprentice struggles to shape a new butter pat with wooden paddles, creating something that looks less like a tidy rectangle and more like a melted top hat. The grocer sighs, some things can't be faked. The flour barrels stand like silent sentinels along the back wall, their contents deceptively pristine under a dusting of white. But lean in closer. That's not pure wheat you're smelling. There's a faint woody note, a whisper of something ... extra. Because every baker in London knew the open secret. Your loaf probably contained more than just flour. The grocer runs his fingers through a sample, feeling for texture. Good body this week, he murmurs to his assistant. The sawdust to chalk ratio is nearly perfect. He's only half joking. When wheat prices spiked, millers would stretch their product with everything from ground bones to powdered limestone. All technically legal additives according to the wonderfully vague Food Adulteration Acts. Historians still argue whether these fillers actually improved bread texture or just made it harder to bite through. A nervous young bride-to-be approaches the counter. My fiance's mother says I must use only the finest flour for my first loaf as a married woman. The grocer nods solemnly and reaches for a special tin labeled pure gold medal flour, which is exactly the same as the regular flour, just sifted twice and marked up 300%. Some traditions never change. Meanwhile, the apprentice sneezes violently into an open barrel, creating his own special seasonal blend. The grocer pretends not to notice that batch was destined for the workhouse anyway. The cellar stairs creak ominously as you follow the grocer down into a darkness that smells of damp oak and secrets. Mind your head, he mutters, just as you nearly collide with a hanging ham that's been curing since the Crimean War. The flickering gas lamp reveals row upon row of casks, some legal, many ... creatively labeled. This is where the real inventory lives. That innocent-looking mineral water barrel filled with Irish whiskey. The crate marked church supplies? Gin. The grocer runs his shop in the shadow of temperance movements, and business is booming. He demonstrates the art of the pour exactly 3 fingers of medicinal brandy into a bottle labeled stomach tonic, with just enough herbal garnish to maintain plausible deniability. Historians still argue whether Victorian teetotalers were genuinely fooled or just politely looking the other way. A police constable's heavy footsteps sound overhead. Everyone freezes until the jingling bell signals his departure, probably just picking up his weekly special tea order, 80 proof. The grocer exhales and adjusts his spectacles. which have fogged up from either humidity or nerves. Back upstairs, the apprentice is explaining to a customer that their tonic might cause temporary rosiness of the cheeks, while conspicuously not making eye contact. Some lessons can't be taught from books. The coconut sits on its own velvet cushion, like a visiting dignitary, its hairy husk polished to a ridiculous sheen. You've stumbled upon the latest craze sweeping London, the Coconut Curiosities display. What was once just an exotic import has become the must-have decorative item for fashionable parlors, thanks largely to a single illustrated newspaper article showing Queen Victoria's cousin posing with one. The grocer demonstrates the proper way to present a coconut to society. First, you must drill the eyes and drain the milk highly uncivilized to leave it sloshing about. Then, polish the shell with beeswax and a soft cloth until you can see a reflection in its ... unique texture. He doesn't mention that half his customers have no idea coconuts are edible. They're too busy using them as bookends, or, in one memorable case, as a hat stand. Historians still argue whether this was peak colonialism or just Victorian interior design run amok. A society matron gasps upon seeing the price tag. 5 shillings? For a nut? The grocer smiles serenely. Ah, but madam, this isn't just any nut. This particular specimen was personally selected by our East Indies agent as having exceptional hemispherical symmetry. Translation: it's slightly less lopsided than the others. In the corner, the apprentice struggles to drill a new display hole, sending coconut milk spraying across the biscuit tins. Somewhere in the tropics, a palm tree laughs. The mousetraps are baited with raisins tonight, a rare extravagance, but necessary after last week's incident with the saffron drawer. You watch as the grocer arranges them in a precise grid pattern, each one positioned according to his years of rodent warfare experience. The big fellows come from the flour sacks, he explains, but the real professionals? They live in the tea chests. Clever as Dickens, those ones. This is an endless battle, fought with Victorian ingenuity. There are tin-lined drawers for the most vulnerable goods, wire mesh screens over the ventilation shafts, and 4 particularly bold offenders, a special demonstration trap in the window featuring a stuffed rat in a tiny pillory. Historians still argue whether this was effective pest control or just early viral marketing. A sudden skittering noise from the ceiling makes the apprentice jump. The grocer sighs, "That'll be Sir Reginald, the shop's unofficial mascot. A rat so large and persistent, they've given up trying to catch him." Rumor has it he winters in the attic of the gentleman's club next door, dining on dropped port-soaked cake crumbs. As you watch, a well-dressed mouse actually pauses to groom its whiskers on the edge of the biscuit barrel before disappearing into the wainscoting. The grocer just shrugs. At least he's polite about it. The gas lights flicker as the grocer tallies the day's earnings, his brass counting machine clicking like a contented cricket. Coins are sorted into neat stacked sovereigns, shillings, and the ever-present halfpennies that always seem to multiply when no one's looking. The ledger opens with a creak, its pages filled with numbers that tell a story far richer than mere profit and loss. You see the human transactions hidden between the lines. The extra quarter-pound of tea, quietly added to Reverend Parsons' order after his wife passed. The accidental overcharge to the obnoxious shipping magnate that somehow balanced out the undercharge to the widowed seamstress. The carefully coded notes about which customers prefer their coffee, strong enough to strip paint versus those who like it barely tinted beige. The shop kept a battle-scarred tabby named Duchess Wines between the grocer's ankles, purring like a poorly greased wheel. She's technically on staff as a mouser, but everyone knows her real job is morale officer. The grocer slips her a sliver of smoked salmon from his supper tin, a ritual as old as the cobblestones outside. Outside, the lamplighter makes his rounds, each new pool of golden light pushing back the evening shadows. The grocer hums as he works, some half-remembered music hall tune, about lost love and found fortunes. The bell above the door jingles one last time as the baker's boy arrives with tomorrow's bread payment for the cinnamon he'll forget to record in the morning. And so the day unwinds itself like a spool of silk thread, each moment settling gently into memory. The shop breathes in the quiet the faint citrus scent of drying orange peels, the earthy whisper of coffee beans resting in their bins, the honeyed ghost of molasses lingering in the cracks of the counter. You can almost see them still, the customers, the neighbors, the ship's captains bringing stories along with their cargo. The grocer's hands, now slow with fatigue, trace the familiar path of locking drawers and straightening jars. There's comfort in these small rituals, in knowing that tomorrow will bring the same clatter of hooves outside, the same debates over sugar quality, the same terrier attempting to smuggle a nutmeg out in its cheeks. The gas lights dim one by one until only the single lamp above the counter remains, casting a warm circle like a stage waiting for its next performance. Somewhere beyond these walls, London murmurs on carriages rattle, fog curls off the Thames, and 1,000 other shops prepare their own nightly retreat. But here, just for now, the world narrows to this quiet kingdom of measured ounces and carefully kept promises. Duchess the cat stretches across the ledger, her purr the only sound left in the dark. The grocer's chair creaks as he leans back, eyes half closed, smiling at some private thought. Outside, the first few raindrops begin to patter against the windows, gentle as a lullaby.